right, we're live. I've actually gone live. I clicked the go live button. YouTube is probably not lying to everybody. We're looking at a slide that says embargoed until April 30th, 2020 at 6 a.m. Pacific. Oh yeah, sweet. It's almost 6 p.m. So I think we're good. Well, Intel has launched new 10th generation Intel Core S series processors. No, not the 10 somethings that I've forgotten in the mobile land. And no, not the 10900Xs. But there is a 10900K. This is Comet Lake. It's new. It's not. I really do think people are going to be confused. I don't know the naming scheme. I do worry a little bit about the naming scheme. And good lord, there are a lot of processors in this announcement.
And also some low power embedded design. So the actual number is somewhere near 40. Though I actually have a big CPU database that I keep with all my Intel stuff. And let's see the numbers. Oh, let me just bring it up here. So.
Oh, I clipped your audio. I'm sorry.
That's right. So Ivy Bridge had 49. Haswell had 83. Skylake had 33, Kaby Lake had 34, Coffee Lake had 26, and Coffee Lake Refresh has 39. So 32 is probably about right. For a Skylake generation family, 32 is about right. Or 40 once we include the T and the TEs.
A lot of people get caught up in the whole red versus blue, but Intel does legit make a crap ton of products. And this is just desktop CPUs we're talking about. We're not even really talking about server or anything advanced.
Most of them differ, just by one multiplier or two multipliers. And this is just Intel trying to optimize out the voltage and frequency current curves, which is fine as long as you create enough processors for your customers at the right level, at the right prices that they want. I mean, Intel's argument is if you need a processor, south of $300 all the way down to $42, we've got something for everyone. But in recent generations, some of those no longer have graphics, for example, or they've done new things. I'm sure we're going to with Turbo Boost Max 3.0 A plus thermal velocity boost.
Yeah, the turbo gets kind of confusing. We'll talk about that as we go through the slide deck, but yeah.
It's going to be fun when we get them into test, just to see what 10 cores of Comet Lake does, especially with regards to power.
Yeah.
Lots of fun numbers coming out of Intel with regards to turbo power.
Yeah, nothing that we can really talk about. There are things that can be deduced. You guys, I mean, Anatech has I think Gavin did like a 30, 40, 50 page write-up. And it's like, oh my gosh, look at the VRMs. The VRMs here are 350 watts or 380 watts or 400 watts.
Yep. So over at Antec, every time there's a new major launch, we do what's called a motherboard overview. So every company that makes motherboards, we reach out to them and say, hey, can you give us all the details, all the VRM details, high quality images, spec sheets, and we will literally go through each one and do a brief summary of each one so we can see, how many boards have 10 gig Ethernet, and there's a lot more this time. How many boards have 2.5 gig Ethernet? Quite a lot of them do. How many have Thunderbolt 3? 7 motherboards this time have Thunderbolt 3. How many have PLX chips and have 32 PCIe lanes? There's 2 of those, and they're both super micro. So we started doing that article back actually with Skylake launch with the 6700K and the I want to say Z97, Z170, and that got a load of traffic. So we've been doing it ever since, and it's a really nice article. It's one of those evergreen ones. It's ones that everybody clicks to because, hey, you want to find out about that Gigabyte UD4 motherboard that nobody's reviewed? Well, we've already analyzed it on day one for you. It also means that Gavin can, when we get motherboards into review, Gavin already knows the whole of the market, so he can decide which ones he thinks are going to be the most effective, or look on Reddit and see what boards people are talking about.
I was surprised by some of the pricing on these boards, given that this is kind of a mainstream processor. At least pricing of the board versus the pricing of the CPU. Some people have labeled this CPU pricing here as like price cuts, but I think Intel is always like super quick to point out, it's like, no, these products are debuting at this price. This is not a price cut. It is less of a price than the previous generation, but that's just the magic of technology.
Yeah. To be fair, Intel's very correct in the exact wording, and they have lots of lawyers behind the reasons for exact wording. You remember when the 10-core high-end desktop was $1,700, and then the next generation it was down to $1,000.
Yeah,
it wasn't a price cut; it was just debuted at the new price, that sort of thing. That being said, Intel has to have something to compete against AMD with. I recently did a CPU guide before all this Comet Lake 10th Gen came out, and if you look at the Amazon top sellers list, 8 of them were AMD, 1 was Intel, and the other one,
ARM?
A Motherboard for some reason. I actually thought you were going to say VIA or something, and that would have been amazing.
There was a couple of sometimes, so that algorithm gets confused sometimes by some of the boards that have a built-in CPU, and then it just lumps in all the motherboards, and it's like, no, this motherboard doesn't count because it doesn't have a soldered CPU, but this other motherboard does count because it's got a soldered CPU. So
I think this one, it was just a standard motherboard bundled with a CPU. But then my response is, how is it number 10 in the top sellers? But then I go over to Newegg, and it doesn't go in order of best selling. It goes in order of relevance, and the top 5 CPUs were Intel. I'm pretty sure they pay for that positioning. if it's anything like retail, then yeah.
The other interesting thing that I noticed in the Anantech article was it looks like some of the OEMs are advertising support for PCIe 4.0, but in the Intel slide deck, there's no mention of that.
I mean, this is a big topic that I could spend quite a few minutes on. So I mean, so when we got the motherboards in, some of them were saying, we have added in PCIe 4 timers, retimers, and drivers, and extra routing to support PCIe 4 for a future Intel product. Brackets Rocket Lake. It's literally specified Rocket Lake, so we know the next product on this platform is Rocket Lake. There's no questioning that. But we asked a couple of the motherboard manufacturers, how much does this PCIe 4 support cost? And it averaged around about $10 extra to the consumer to enable this support. So
let's come down a bit.
Well, I mean, so for a $200 product, you're looking at extra 5% for PCIe 4 support. The problem is, so if you buy the board now, you can't use it. You essentially have committed yourself to a Rocket Lake upgrade if you buy the board with the intention to use PCIe Gen 4. Your other option is, well, let's just buy the best PCIe Gen 3 board I can get with my money and a Comet Lake CPU, and then if I want Rocket Lake, I go and buy the best motherboard I can buy at that time with a Rocket Lake CPU. Now, the issue with the PCIe Gen 4 is none of the motherboard vendors have chips to officially qualify the PCIe 4 standard. What these companies do is they have specialized hardware that they can put on in the socket, which will act like a PCIe 4 device. And so they can say that, hey, our system conforms to the PCIe 4, international spec. Is it J? No, it's PCIe SIG, isn't it? So if we conform to PCIe SIG specifications, that doesn't mean that it's QVL'd, that it's actually qualified for Rocket Lake. You actually need to, QVL requires you to have the product to add it in with A and B. So even though you support the standard, there still may need to be firmware tweaks in order to get it to work. It's like a standard PCIe 3 device. no vendor tests every CPU in their motherboard with every PCIe Gen 3 device, all the RAID cards, all the graphics cards, all the SATA cards, USB cards. But because it's a spec, it should work. But the ones they've tested get into their QVL list. Now, nothing's QVL'd for PCIe Gen 4 because they don't have the PCIe Gen 4 CPUs. So you can buy a board now with the possibility it might not work.
I'm having flashbacks to PCI Express 2.0 when that first came out, and then there was another wave of motherboards about 6 months later that still had PCIe 2.0, but a lot of problems went away.
The problem I think Intel did here is they should have just had another generation on the same socket, because these CPUs can clearly go into that socket. I don't think the extra 49 pins is providing that much extra power. And then actually made that PCIe Gen 4 switch with a brand new socket, with a brand new CPU, and that way everybody's happy and everything works. Do you remember when we changed from DDR3 to DDR4?
Oh yeah.
That was Skylake actually, wasn't it? So yeah. We had the same chipset, the same socket for two CPU. No, sorry, Intel actually changed it, didn't they? They changed the Broadwell socket so that there wasn't any support. But we had all the boards for that generation were DDR4. I managed to get a DDR3 dev board, and there were some DDR3 Xeons, but ultimately everybody changed to DDR4 straight away. It was a clean cut, and it worked. Now,
I think PCIe... I think the CPUs had an IMC that would work with DDR3, but it was only dual channel. Or dual DIMM. It was dual. It only would support 2 DIMMs in DDR3 mode. You couldn't run 4 DIMMs. Something like that.
I still have the board somewhere in the office. But yeah, it's some of these big changes. It just helps if you have a clean break, right?
Yeah.
Because then everybody updates at once. Nobody's complaining about compatibility issues. Well, they shouldn't be. So, I mean, we'll see when Rocket Lake comes out. Best guess when? End of the year, if we're lucky.
I was also thinking about like the process node thing, because 14 nanometers, but there are 10 nanometer 10th generation CPUs, at least in mobile. But is the 14 nanometer here tweaked and different than the X299 14 nanometer? And is there, I mean, power delivery, clock speed?
I mean, Intel does this thing where on one level of marketing, they just call everything now 14 nanometer class. But if there's another level of marketing where they'll say that, this is 14 plus plus. So.
All right, let's switch to the slide deck and run through the slide deck, because I think the slide deck will be a lot of fun and keep us organized. But I need to copy your audio there. Just 1 second. All right, I think we've got audio. Hopefully the chat will let us know if you're there in this view.
Hello, I'm here again.
Keyword is tech potato.
Tech potato, yes. Subscribe, like, press the bell.
Oh yeah, Dr. Cutress's Twitter and now YouTube channel is in the link in the description below. Woo!
I started my channel. It's called Tech Potato because the first video I ever did with Wendell, if you look at the YouTube auto generate English, right at the end where he says goodbye, it says something like, "We're awkward. Thanks everybody for watching Tech Potato." It's meant to be level 1 text, but translated through YouTube, it's Tech Potato.
It might be also a little bit of my lingering hillbilly. I mean, I've tried to learn to speak proper English. Well, not the Queen's English, obviously, but it's not.
I do say. Come on, darling.
How many pluses does 14 nanometer have? I think there's more than 14 pluses in 14 nanometer. There's more pluses than nanometers. That's probably...
14 plus is 15, right?
It's an increment.
Incremental, yeah.
It's a C++ joke.
I mean, so I actually did a video a while ago that's maybe on the Anantech channel, or I may have done it on a personal channel, just as an attempt to get into this whole YouTube thing, where I said what Intel should have done is just remove the plus nomenclature and just gone 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7,
But
And
we
then
would be on 3 by now with iterations to 14.
well, the whole thing about a plus is so a plus is meant to be what's called a BKM update, where they optimize the manufacturing to provide more frequency or more frequency at a given voltage, or lower voltage at a given frequency, either at one or many points during the voltage frequency curve. And previously, when we had 65 nanometer, when we had 90 nanometer and above that, these BKM updates were just not mentioned, right? There was never a plus with those manufacturing nodes. All we did is we saw a new revision of a SKU that may have had a different stepping, and Intel's ARC page said, well, instead of this being 1.31 volts, it's now 1.25. But because everybody's more on the ball with what these things are now, the audiences are more educated. There's more ways to get this information from people like me, from people like you, from other people. Everything is now scrutinized. Now, of course, also marketing has improved, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
if there's
you
an
say that, but I'm
opportunity,
looking at this slide where it says around 60% of games are optimized for single core, which Intel has said, oh, that was just an internal reference. Don't flay us too hard for that. But this is the updated deck. That's weird. Oh well, that's fine.
I think Steve from Gamers Nexus had a very big problem with that phrasing.
Yeah. Well, Intel actually clarified and said that we didn't mean that.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the games that I used to play at LAN parties 15 years ago, Soldat, is now on Steam. That's very single-threaded. It's a load of fun. Though I don't think the difference between quad-core Intel from 10 years ago and a 10-core would actually do much for my frame rates. Sure, I'll go from 600 to 1,000.
Well, it's not. I mean, Intel's not wrong. The faster things can get into the CPU and out of the CPU, especially when the computation to be done is trivial, minimizing that round trip time will absolutely reduce or improve it reduces the system latency, but it improves the overall user experience dramatically. And so 10th gen Core S series processors with up to 5.3 gigahertz, they really explain that, and that's like the turbo section, and it gets super complicated. We'll talk through that. I'm sure half the chat's already read literally everything that has been posted on the internet. Best overclocking experience, we'll talk about that. New overclocking enhancements.
Well, so I want to just talk about the frequency, because my old boss, Anand at Nantech, he gave a great quote to me once. It was just an off comment. He said, out of a choice between double frequency and double cores, for the same power, give me double frequency. Right? Because frequency makes everything better.
Yeah.
IPC makes everything better. Cores make something better. Something's better. So yeah, I mean, frequency is good. You also have to match it with IPC. Now, don't forget, this is still a Skylake generation, so AMD still has a slight IPC advantage on Zen 2 in most situations. So even though Intel is going to be leading in frequency, AMD's still got anywhere from a was it a -5 to a 10-15% advantage.
Yeah.
I forget the exact numbers, but it depends on the benchmark. These Intel chips still don't have AVX 512 and funky things like that. So,
well, it's Intel is able to retire things out of the pipeline a lot faster, which is not just clock speed. So, I mean, the time that it takes for AMD to complete certain operations is a very long time, but it can do a crap ton of stuff in parallel, and it can do a crap ton of stuff that's farther on down in the pipeline. So effectively, it's faster. But if you're talking about like retiring a particular instruction or sequence of instructions super quick, or responding to like hardware interrupts and things like that, there's a little bit of a disadvantage. But that gap is getting like so narrow that it makes me giddy.
It's Intel's got interesting things in the pipeline for core design. I mean, the Tremont Atom Core uses dual 3-wide decoders, for example.
Mm-hmm.
AMD is using that L2 Tage branch predictor. Intel doesn't talk about its branch predictors because they like to keep them private. And then there's micro-op caches are different on both the architectures. Between does Atom even have a micro-op cache yet? I forget. The floating point and integer schedulers are unified on Intel. They're separate on AMD. And different ports do different things. There's a lot of knobs to push and pull, and it's like the semiconductor space, right? You push one knob, you adjust a graph, one thing to its optimum point, and then three go out of optimum, right?
Yes.
It's these microarchitects. Previously, 10 years ago, it used to be, Pentium D. It used to be just as much performance as you can get, whatever the power. Now they say we want at least, they will work to a standard of, well, for anything we change in a core, we need 2% more performance for 1% power, that sort of thing. So they're being very aggressive in how they're doing future CPU designs. I mean, that's why AMD has done so well with Zen and Zen 2. And everybody, fingers crossed for Zen 3, but also, fingers crossed for Sunny Cove when it comes to desktop, and fingers crossed for all the Coves, and fingers crossed for all the Zens, because everybody wants performance. Sorry, but you've got a slide about overclocking.
Well, no. It's all related, because like one of the things that seems to be the case with Zen 2 is the floor plan was optimized for AVX2, and AVX2 on contemporary Intel CPUs at the time was sort of more bolted on, and just because of the physical placement in the floor plan, it gave Zen 2 a slight advantage on AVX2, which is kind of unheard of. Like if you look at AVX performance on Zen 1 and the microarchitecture changes they made for Zen 2, but also just physically on the silicon, it's closer to the data bus, basically. It doesn't have to move as far inside the CPU, whereas on the Intel side, it's got to go to a completely different piece of silicon, pretty much.
It's I saw a good part of the paper recently that even though transistors are getting thinner and wires are getting thinner, and we're able to push more frequency, the wire latency is actually increasing because of the increased wire resistance. Because as you make a wire thinner, the resistance increases. Yeah. So what used to be 100 picoseconds is now 1,000 picoseconds, and so every nanometer of wire you have in the system slows you down.
Yeah.
I mean, Intel with Sunny Cove, with their 10th gen Ice Lake core, they increased the L1 cache latency from 4 clocks to 5 clocks. That's an instant 25% disadvantage, but it means they can be a lot more flexible on other things.
Yeah.
They also increased cache sizes, and cache size and cache latency are also into play. If anybody makes a 128 kilobyte L1 cache with a 3-cycle latency, you are a god.
We have to figure out some new process technologies in order to do that.
I will.
It's a compound problem, because the increase in resistance means that you need more time for the atoms to actually settle into a defined state. But silicon, because there's so many layers in a CPU, in a lot of the layers there's also repeaters on the line, and the repeaters have their own settling time, and so all of those things actually, for the different operations and the different instructions that you're doing, there is kind of a lot of elasticity with the clock. Like 5.3 gigahertz, there's a lot of mechanisms in there to be like, this instruction's taking longer, we're going to complete on the next cycle, so it's not really super well defined. And a lot of those more complex mechanisms will actually respond to thermals and other things like that. So when the CPU is really cold, it really legit might only take 8 or 9 cycles to retire a particular instruction, but then it's super hot and it's like, okay, this is going to take a little bit longer. I don't think we're going to be able to, deal with that, at this level. So we're going to have to retire the CPU instruction, on the next cycle, and it can deal with that. Whereas previously it would just crash.
Sam Snedden, who says, "Here's a solution to your 3-cycle latency, and that's a slow clock speed." Haha, funny. Yeah, perhaps I should have clarified that. But he's right. He's right. If you slow things down, cycles get easier.
But also, in 1/5 billionth of a second, light, which is the fastest thing there is, can only travel about this far, about that far. 1/5 billionth of a second. Light only has enough time to go that far.
What's the unit of the time. Is it a jiffy? Is the time light takes to go 1 foot? And it's about 1 nanosecond, something like
Yeah,
that.
that's gonna be at least 3 jiffies, sir.
Yep.
It's like, oh no, there's so much noise in the silicon. Okay, 4 jiffies. 4 jiffies it is. It's a kind of material, black magic and sort of, a dark science. But the overclocking enhancements, to just sort of bring this home, they're letting you enable hyperthreading on a per core basis now, which might help with thermals and some other stuff. There's also DMI overclocking, which I can't imagine that would work well, but I'll reserve judgment until I play with it. And then they've got the enhanced voltage frequency curve controls. So they're also exposing the API for this. So apparently, I'm hoping that'll mean it'll be cross-platform, but I think that it probably is just going to mean that this will work with things like MSI Afterburner.
So I actually have a commentary on all the different parts here. So per core hyperthreading worries me a little bit because obviously the OS has to know the difference between a core thread and a hyperthread thread. So say I change my CPU so it's 10 cores and 15 threads. Will it be able to determine which ones are hyperthreads, and will it be able to schedule appropriately?
On Linux, this happens really well. It's a power saving hack. And so you can hot add and hot remove CPUs to the system except for CPU 0. So at least on Linux, I don't know about Windows, but at least on Linux, if they implemented it that way, I don't think it'll be a problem.
But I mean, the standard way for a scheduler to see all threads is all threads are identical. They're uniform and they all have access to the same resources.
I don't know that that's really true anymore.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's changed, but with a CPU that has 10 cores and 20 threads, the CPU instantly knows that 10 are, main threads and 10 are hyperthreads. Technically, you could call them all hyperthreads.
Gavin gave you £2 and says overclocking the DMI, no potatoes.
No dice, no chips. So that's my point on per core hyperthreading with the DMI overclock and the PEG. So this is the PCIe overclock. So we used to be able to do this back with FSB and the early days of Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge. The downside is that when you overclocked the bus, you also disrupted the speed of the SATA ports.
Yeah.
Intel this time around have actually split them up, so even you can overclock the DMI, that PCIe by 4 link, without affecting the bus of any of the SATA ports or USB ports on the chipset. Whether that will actually provide a performance benefit, I did ask Intel whether this was a base frequency adjustment or a multiplier adjustment, and they didn't get back to me yet. So by multiplier I mean ratios as well, and even though it's loosely based on the PCIe 3x4 standard. Somebody did ask why are we not on PCIe Gen 4 or for the DMI, because the CPU doesn't support it and they couldn't enable it for Rocket Lake only. You may see Rocket Lake boards when Rocket Lake comes out. No, I doubt. I even doubt that Rocket Lake will have Gen 4 DMI, because then it would just make everything a bit more complex and a bit more stupid.
Yeah, it seems like that would be problematic. But it's a little bit painting yourself into a corner if you wanted 16 lanes for a GPU and 4 lanes dedicated for NVMe, because high-performance NVMe will absolutely saturate the DMI 3.0 link.
Well, so at least one of the ASRock boards, I think, has a, or maybe one of the MSI boards, has a PCIe Gen 4x4 M.2 slot. And the idea is that when it detects a Gen 4 CPU, you can put in a Gen 4 SSD into that M.2 slot and it'll work. But the easiest way to do that is to, if you only have 16 lanes, because we don't know how many PCIe lanes Rocket Lake will have, is make the first PCIe slot PCIe 4 Gen 4x8, which is the same as PCIe 3x16. Now you still need a PCIe 4 for that bandwidth to work. And I really doubt that a GPU using PCIe 4x8 would lose much out from a PCIe 4x16 for gaming. Now, for high performance computing, it's a different thing, but this isn't the system for that. So, yeah, it just gets a lot more complicated for not a lot of good reasons. Um, with the new voltage frequency tools, yeah, you're right. Intel did state that they're opening up the SDK to third parties. Apparently, they said they've been doing that a while. This is why you can have the ASUS software and the MSI software and the ASRock software, do all these XTU like quirks. Um, the voltage frequency curve worries me a little because when you overclock or underclock, you're just worrying about one voltage frequency point. So if you have a stability issue, that's easy to diagnose. If you're changing a whole voltage frequency curve and one point is out, it's going to be a lot harder to diagnose which one is the issue for overclocking or underclocking stability.
Yeah, I've got an 18 core that's like that. It's exactly like you described. There's a couple of cores that just for whatever reason are super problematic, but all the other cores are amazing, and it's like, wow, this chip is amazing except for these two cores that are like just complete turds.
Well, also this voltage frequency adjustment, it's done on a chip level, not on the core level. If it's on the core level, you've now multiplied all your different things that you can change by a factor 10. But some of these cores are favored cores, so they boost their voltage even more, right, to get to the higher frequency, because they can. It's just if Intel, I mean, the way Intel's shown this voltage frequency adjustment is essentially you can pick several points on the voltage frequency curve and affect each one individually. If they just said, well, you can pick between these 5 curves, that might be a better solution.
It's also like, and then you're right, but then also Turbo Boost Max 3.0 adds another dimension of insanity to that, because the favorite cores will let you go higher, but then there's no increase in voltage applied to those in that scenario. So
it does say that in the slide. Yes, so these are just binned cores. So
yeah,
it's the same thing AMD is doing. It helps get you every little micro extra performance out of the cores.
This core always only takes 3 cycles to complete that AVX operation for whatever reason. The magic of material science. All the other cores take 4. We don't know why. It's black magic. No one understands it. But also like the thin die solder thermal interface material. I can't wait for DeBauer to get his hands on this and just sort of take it apart and figure out if this is going to be like a thing or not. Because the IHS is thicker and the silicon's thinner. What does it mean?
Well, I mean, you're on the same call. I asked this question. I said, how much is it thinned by? And the response I got was a garbled mess. I think maybe because of Cisco WebEx. And I think the guy got confused and started talking about volume being removed.
How many cubic millimeters of silicon? And it's like, well, okay.
At some point, I thought I heard him say 500 micron cubed or something, which is just a really weird thing to say when that's the question.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
It makes sense, right? So these chips, when you make them, you get the wafer and you do all your crazy lithography stuff and you build it up, but then you put the pads for the package on the top and then you flip the chip over. That's why it's called a flip chip arrangement. And then that means that wherever you started in the wafer building your chip, you have microns or even millimeters of silicon still left on top, and you slowly polish it down, polish. The idea is you don't want to get too close to the transistors, because the transistors was the first layer that you built in the silicon. But you also, those are the transistors, they're the ones that get hot, right? So you want them as close to the IHS and the cooling as possible. So that's where thinning works. At TSMC and I think there's a the new memory manufacturer in China has what's called an X stacking for their DRAM, which involves putting 2 thinned wafers together. So I mean, other fabs have been doing this for different types of products already. I mean, so thinning is also used in chiplet designs, right? Because you need all the chips to be at the same Z height for the thermal solution to work optimally. Otherwise, you have to use a shim. So if you can thin the silicon, that works. So this die thinning that Intel's doing, it's going to be barely noticeable to the point where, excuse me, you have to delid and get your calipers out to find out exactly what. But you could be talking anything from 0 degrees to 5 degrees, and now when you've got 10 cores running at 4.9 gigahertz, you're going to want those 5 degrees.
4.9? No, I want 5.3. But in order to do that, I've got 70 degrees C. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
So the next slide was the world's fastest gaming processor up to 5.3 gigahertz. That's with the thermal velocity thing. 10 cores, 20 threads. They're measuring performance. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so 5.3 star gigahertz. That star there is important because you can only get that in very specific situations. If you live anywhere south of Berlin, you're probably
there's a 20-degree band around the equator of the U.S. or of the Earth, and if you live in that plus or minus 20-degree band, don't know.
Yeah, you won't get it. Was it 5.1 gigahertz is the all-core turbo? I mean, we'll see the chip list in a second, but yeah, we previously used to say the top speed of a processor was the Turbo Boost 2 speed.
Yeah.
Then when Skylake high-end desktop came out, is now the Turbo Boost 3 speed, and now which was a favored core, and now we're talking about thermal velocity boost, which is if you can get it. I mean, turbo isn't guaranteed. Yeah. If you can't hit 5.3 gigahertz, Intel you have no legal grounding in which to get a refund from Intel on that point alone.
Yeah, it's 4.9 gigahertz all-core turbo frequency in the best possible scenarios.
Yeah, and then if you can't do that, 4.8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 5.1 Turbo Boost 2.0, that is, and then 3.0 is 5.2, and then thermal velocities 5.3. So really the difference between Max Boost 3.0 and the extra 100 megahertz is until it hits a silicon temperature of 70 degrees C, which I think is a little higher than the mobile version of the 10th gen CPUs, which were what, like 60 or 65?
I think they staggered it. So 60 you went up 1 bin, 65 you went up 2. Oh okay. So 65 you went up 1, and if you were below 60 you went up 2. Though, so at this point I should probably, because this is just a wall of numbers, right? That's
the best kind of wall of numbers.
Look at that top row. You've got processor number, okay, it's self-understandable. Base clock speed, okay, everybody knows what that is. Then you have Intel Turbo Boost Technology 2.0, maximum single core turbo frequency. Intel Turbo Boost Max Technology 3.0 frequency. Intel Thermal Velocity Boost Technology single all-core turbo frequency. Intel all. If you don't know what any of those mean, it's frustrating.
It wasn't that long ago they didn't publish these numbers, and I would like this is better than not. So.
No, I know, but it's and the thing is the number they'll put on the box is just the peak number in whatever line.
Yeah.
So 125 watts, that's the highest number, right? No, sorry, 2933 megahertz. but perhaps we should clarify all these points for people who haven't ever seen them before.
Definitely a good idea.
So on my article on Nantech, I've got a little handy guide that you can print out and laminate, because given the current global situation, nobody has anything better to do. Base frequency. So I'll just take the 10900K. I've got my monitor over here, so I'm going to point at this, even though nobody can see it. So base frequency of 3.7 gigahertz, up to 3.7 gigahertz. So this is the frequency that's actually guaranteed by warranty. This is the frequency that Intel guarantees that you will get as long as you have standard cooling, and a standard environment, which I think Intel defines at 50 degrees C or 45 degrees C ambient.
So that's what I'm going to get when I'm running AVX 512, in other words.
Yeah. And you're also using the Intel reference cooler, which has a certain thermal capacity. And you're also not at thermal limits, which means you're not at like 105 degrees where the CPU has to back off. So base frequency is the guaranteed frequency when not at thermal limits. Then you have turbo, or and turbo, just as a general definition, um, is a frequency that you can achieve, that you can get to when you're below what are called turbo power limits. So you have a power limit for your turbo mode, and also when you're inside the turbo power time. So when you're in turbo, you essentially have a bucket of time. It's actually like time multiplied by energy. And as you stay in turbo, that bucket decreases. It has a constant fill-in rate, but it decreases. And when that's empty, you can no longer turbo. Um, and Intel has very complex equations defining all that. All core turbo is a frequency the processor should run when all cores are loaded, as long as you're still inside the turbo time and power. Turbo Boost 2, specifically Turbo Boost 2, is the frequency that any of the cores can reach during that turbo time. So in the case of the 10900K, your Turbo Boost 2.0 is 5.1. That means if you load up core 0 through to core 9, during turbo time, they should hit 5.1 gigahertz, as long as you're also in thermal limits and whatnot. Then you have Turbo Boost Max 3. This is what we keep referring to as favored cores. This is the slide where 2 of the cores are better than the other 8. And these ones will hit another 100 megahertz in this case, so up to 5.2 gigahertz. Now you have Intel Thermal Velocity Boost, or TVB.
You're going to have to buy the i9 to get that. You i7 people, no, you're not worthy.
Yeah, this is only for the 10-core stuff. And this is what we keep saying about your chip has to be below 70 degrees. So if you're still within that turbo window, if you're within your power limits and you still have buckets of energy free, and you're under 70 degrees, your favored cores, so only the 2 cores out of the 10 that can do this, will go up another 100 megahertz. That's where you get your 5.3 term.
That's going to make my Geekbench score. Yeah!
But of course, with Intel, the more cores you run, the lower frequency you get as a whole, because it tries to balance frequency and the overall power of the chip.
Yep.
So if you're in that thermal velocity boost, and you have all 10 cores running, say, Cinebench. So you go from a fresh system, you've got all your bucket of energy full, and you've got all your turbo power limit fine, and you instantly go Geekbench. It will instantly go all 10 cores at your thermal velocity boost, which is, this case is 4.9 gigahertz. The minute it hits 70, it should drop down to 4.8, which is your Turbo Boost 2.0 max. And then once you run out of the bucket of energy, then you go to the standard all-core turbo, which is 4.8 gigahertz. That being said, while Intel defines the turbo time and the turbo limits, the power limits, and that bucket of energy you have, motherboard manufacturers can ignore it, and that doesn't break warranty. So this is why you see motherboards that have way over the top voltage VRMs, voltage regulation modules. This is why you have over the top cooling on those. They have recommendations for coolers that you can use, or sometimes they'll bundle a cooler with it. And there's a couple of designs that have built-in water blocks. I think Gigabyte has the Waterforce, and ASRock has the Aqua. So they build those motherboards to be able to turbo for longer, and they will change the BIOS settings such that you can turbo longer. It's neat. Yeah. So I had a discussion with Intel's turbo guy about this. It's a guy called Guy Thierra, and you can read the interview on Anantech. And I got very specific clarification for him. Intel's turbo limits and turbo power are just guidances. They're just recommendations. Motherboard manufacturers can do whatever they like, and it's well within warranty. What you can't do is actually adjust the top frequency. That's overclocking, and that's not covered by warranty. If you want to do that, you have to buy one of Intel's performance protection plans. Know that Intel also has overclocking software, XTU and Performance Maximizer. The minute you overclock on those, technically you lose your warranty. But
Intel did clarify they are offering the performance protection plan thing on this, so that's nice.
Yeah, $20 I think it is. That being said, yeah, who's going to take the plunge and do the 5.3 gigahertz all core?
I will. I don't care. It's whatever.
It
We'll see.
well it
I mean, at
so
$488 for a chip, I mean, we can just get a bag of these. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, there's only
so
30 million people unemployed in America. It's totally fine.
so- hey, you've all got your stimulus checks. What are you on about? So we should perhaps talk about the TDP, thermal design power.
Yeah, it says 125 there, but I'm looking at those motherboards that you guys published, and it's like 300.
So TDP is the maximum power consumption when you are at all core frequency non-turbo. So in this case, 3.7 gigahertz at 10 cores should be 125 watts or less. Under turbo, you can do any power you like. But Intel has the recommendation of the power limit, turbo power limit, which is PL2. And for that 10900K, the top SKU, the PL2 Intel states is 250 watts. We spoke to motherboard vendors at CES, and they said they were designing for 350.
Nice.
So in 350 watts, you have a choice, right? Wendell, I give you a choice, right? Money no object choice. You have 10 Intel Skylake version 5 cores at 4.9 gigahertz. Let's say you're on thermal velocity boost, or 64 Zen 2 cores at 3 gigahertz.
I think that's a loaded question, and you know it.
I mean,
do you know what's in the other room compiling Yocto Linux right now? It is literally recompiling Yocto Linux for like 7 platforms at once. It is glorious.
Would that be the 9900KS?
You know it. It's got about 60 more cores than that. 56, I guess.
I actually have a box here with Intel's auction-only i9 9990XE, the one that was 14 cores at 5 gigahertz. That pulls a lot of power.
I've got a 3175 in another different room that is, I think it's running at 4.4 gigahertz right now, but it idles.
Yeah. You mean one of these?
Yeah.
I actually have just finished recording a video on this, where I invited Joe Stepongzi from Bearded Hardware, the overclocker, to talk about his experiences on extreme overclocking that thing, and whether it was a good idea for Intel to actually launch it. It's retrospective. Hopefully that video will go out tomorrow.
It's not bad. I mean, I've got dual 360 radiators on that machine, and it's basically running at like 4.4, 4.5, 24/7. But it's like 700 watts at idle and 1600-ish under load.
You cray.
It's cold here right now. I'd rather do that than pay for the heat, so it's probably fine.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
But yeah, and there's a lot of processors here. I mean, this starts at the i9 10900K, and then there's the KF. There's only, 472 to 488, okay, I guess, and then 65 watt TDP for the 10900. Come on. I saw an ASRock's lineup. They seem to be announcing that, K or not K, they can still give you a way to mess with PL2, like you were talking about, and Tau, I guess, so that you can get a little bit more performance out of those non-K processors. The i7s and the pricing, 488 to 298 here for the i7 10900F, 323 for the 10700 KF.
So I noticed that going from the i9K to the KF was only a $16 drop. But for the i7, it's a $25 drop.
Makes no sense.
For the i5, it's a $25 drop. I don't know. If you go to the slide with the T processors, I want that one at the top there.
The Pentium Gold G6600?
No, the T processors.
Oh, right, the next page. The i9 10900T.
Yay!
35 watts.
No! It's that chip is going to go in systems with basic cooling. And I want to see what turbo power it does, it pulls. I've asked for a sample. I doubt I'll get one, but
it's the only i9 without thermal velocity boost. Why?
Hey,
Because it's always
DDR4
going to be at
2933.
it's always going to be at TJ Maxx.
One thing I should point out is these processors all have UHD 630 graphics. Um, and the top ones are at 1250 megahertz, I think. That's exactly the same config and frequency we've had for 5 generations now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Roll on
Well,
Tiger Lake, I think.
well, the 2933 memory will probably yield a boost there, a small boost, but probably nothing dramatic.
But nobody's really running these processors at 2933. At least none of the kind of people who might be watching this stream. Hopefully, everybody's enabled XMP if they can. If you go up to the slide above, just all the processors, this is the Intel's support. Everything new about these processors slide, where we have hyper threading on everything from i9 to i3. Finally, we used to have hyper threading on everything up to quad core. Now we have hyper threading across i9 to i3. Technically, the Pentium Golds are hyper threaded as well, so that's good. The last two sections on the new point, so 2.5 gig Intel Ethernet.
They made a point in the fine print here of saying it's definitely stepping 2B. You've read terrible things on the internet. It's stepping 2B. We fixed those terrible things.
Well, so from the perspective of 2.5 gig adoption, this is good, but people should realize that it still requires the vendor to buy the controller. And Intel actually has the price of the controller. If I can find it, yeah, $2.40 for that controller. Expected discontinuance 2034. That's a 15-year product.
Well, I mean, Gigabit I wouldn't have said would be around for as long as it's been around, and good lord, it's been around forever.
Yeah. So I mean, 2.5 gig. In our motherboard overview, a lot of boards have the Intel version. There's also the Aquantia. Aquantia does its own NIC. Aquantia is now owned by Broadcom. Excuse me. Which used to be Avago. And then you also have the Realtek 8125B, I think it is, and that's their Dragon Gaming NIC. So 2.5 gig is slowly getting on board, and part of this is because we now have Wi-Fi routers with 2.5 gig ports. They're now becoming more mainstream.
And this can do Wi-Fi 6 through CNVI, which technically doesn't use PCIe lanes.
Yeah, that CNVI is Intel's proprietary RF to Mac connection. I've asked repeatedly if Intel are going to open that standard, and they said no. We want it custom to us because it's lower power than PCIe. So again, the thing here, it's over CNVI, but if the system has Wi-Fi 6 and you want to take advantage of that, you've got to buy the Intel RF module. Yeah. Which just means people have to buy more of the Intel ecosystem. Now, they might get a discount if they buy both the 2.5 gig and the Wi-Fi 6. But yeah, so the 2.5 gig chip, the i225, Intel quietly pushed out an erratum, or was it leaked an erratum, saying that our chip doesn't actually conform to the proper spec. It's out of the 2.5 gigabits per second, when connected to certain switches and endpoints, you'll get a decrease of about, was it 10 megabits per second, I think it was?
It was packet loss in a worst case scenario.
Yeah, so you're losing 2.5% or something like that of your performance in the worst case scenario, because they didn't adhere to IEEE spec or something like that.
Well, in practical terms though, that would be for like a UDP stream. For TCP, it may cause the connection to back off more than it should, just because it will detect packet loss. So yeah, it probably won't matter for internet loads, but it probably would just because of the latency, and the congestion algorithm will be like, oh, this is ridiculous latency, I'll deal with that. But then for local traffic, I think it'll be worse.
So Intel says that they will be a B2 stepping of the 2.5 gig Ethernet coming in the second half of the year.
And that's what this slide mentions.
Well, so it means that every board out there now using it is using the B1 stepping. and that you can't just firmware tweak it to the B2, right? It's
Yeah.
actually a physical. So if 2.5 gig Ethernet is your jam, it's really hard to say, but avoid the boards with Intel right now if you really need that extra last 1%, 2.5%, 10% of performance. Um, yeah, I mean there are other options, and Intel will say for most of the consumers that this is targeted for, it won't be a big deal. Patrick Kennedy from Serve the Home actually did a write-up a while ago about the i225 because it's not suitable for server use because it doesn't allow some sort of pass-through.
Yeah.
Compared to the compared to the gigabit i210s.
Yeah.
So it's to be honest, I thought Intel would have 2.5 gig and 5 gig chips out by now. They've had 10 gig chips out for ages, but
there was a weird regression too, with like the 217, like the i217, which is still one of the embedded parts. The
yeah,
server drivers used to not care. And like if you had a motherboard that had like the i210 and a 217, it would just use the same driver and it was fine. And then there was some kind of a driver update or a driver tweak, and then the 217s would just stop working. And it's like, oh, we don't support those anymore. That's not a server grade NIC. Whereas it used to be that if you just had any server grade NIC, then all of your NICs would use the same driver and get server-ish.
yeah.
But they've sort of, cordoned off the features. I was like, no, that's not you didn't pay for that. You don't get that. And that's a little off-putting. There might be a technical reason for that, but it was a surprise because it's always a surprise when you're running a system and then it's like, oh, there's a driver update. Oh, I have less features now than I did before. Whoops.
It's was it most of Intel's gigabit NICs either come in V or LM or AT, and it's the LMs that are the server grade ones meant to be.
I think the XT also is like the 550 XT.
Oh yeah, the 10 gig NICs, yeah.
Yeah. So
the X550 AT2. That's the PCIe Gen 3 version, I think.
And there really are there's some nice features on those cards, like offloading. A lot of the offloading that those cards do is like legit super useful in a server space.
I've got some around. I finally bought a 10 gig switch last year because somebody mispriced it on Amazon. It was meant to be £1,200, and I got it for $700, a 24 port switch.
Yeah.
And so I was like, finally, you got it just under my limit to go 10 gig. Unfortunately, it was 24 ports, and it was £700. And I thought, well, this is never going to come up again. It's approximately 9 months to my birthday present. Yeah, and then I bought a house, so that was a problem.
Well, yeah, if you think about it, it's like, I'm going to get a house and I'm going to do a little bit of networking upgrading for your house. It's like, oh, that doesn't cost anything. We'll just throw that in with the house price. It's like, it's inconsequential.
It goes on the mortgage. Yeah. No,
yeah.
I don't think that'll go down too well.
Yeah, could be worse. It is exciting to see Intel launching some stuff. I'm going to reserve judgment until I actually get hands-on and play with things. But Intel's. I mean, there's a lot of competition in this space. Intel is going to have to come up with some really amazing stuff to please everybody. It's going to be an interesting year.
So I'm in two minds when I deal with Intel with this. It's a case of are you actually being that competitive against what's out there? And that annoys me because obviously they've had so long with 10 nanometer not working, and that it should be working. We should be on the second or third gen of 10 nanometer by now. And we should be enjoying the Cove cores and looking forward to XE type graphics.
New delicious microarchitectures.
Yeah, and stuff you can really sink your teeth into, and maybe we'd have IDF back again. But the other part of me is, well, if I was in Intel's position, would I be doing anything different than what they're doing now? And the answer is aside from messaging stuff, probably not. This is the sort of product that if this is all I could do, is what I'd be putting out. I mean, would you I guess I would change the whole motherboard situation, like I mentioned before, and actually move, PCIe Gen 4 with Rocket Lake onto a completely new socket and make that a bit of an easier change. Um, but yeah, it's and unless it involves doing something wacky. I mean, making the die masks go from 8 core to 10 core isn't that big of a jump. And the way they've done this, 4, 6, 8, 10 core, and they've just made the die longer, right? They've kept the graphics the same. There's, sprinkle a few fixes for Spectre Meltdown, which are, important to have. But would I be doing anything different? And if I wanted to do anything that was sort of paradigm shifting, there probably wouldn't be enough of a momentum behind it internally at Intel in order to do that. I mean, Intel has, internal Black Ops type stuff going on all the time that we never see the light of day. They're trying new things. I mean, you can bet that for like I said earlier, Tremont Atom cores have 2 3 wide decoders per core. You can bet that they were simulating, well, what's the effect of having a 6 wide, a 5 wide, a 4 wide? What if we had 2 3 wides? What if we had 2 4 wides? All those sorts of little crazy things that just, adjust performance ever so slightly.
What if we had a gigabyte of EDRAM on the CPU? Oh, wait.
So I think I mentioned this on the last stream, right? You remember Crystal Well, Intel's products that had the EDRAM, the 128 megabytes of EDRAM that acted like an L4. The bandwidth for there was 50 gigabytes per second bidirectional. We're already there with the newest generation of chips on DDR4 memory. And LP DDR4X 3733 on the mobile space is actually 68.2 gigabytes per second versus what EDRAM was on 50. So,
oh, wow.
If you want EDRAM, you need to find something that's faster than DRAM, slower, and obviously it's going to be slower than L3 cache.
But lower latency.
Yeah.
Than system memory, anyway.
Yeah. And is it going to act as a victim cache? Is it going to act as an inclusive cache? Is it just going to be filled with is it just going to monitor things through tags? I mean, Intel's changed the way it did its Xeon chips for Skylake, right? The L3 cache was more like a non-inclusive victim cache rather than just a fully inclusive cache like it is on the Skylake desktop, because there are size considerations and everything you have to do there, and some of it has benefits for graphics, and some of it has benefits for things like spec-in and spec-FP and
noisy neighbor. The noisy neighbor problem is much less on the Skylake server parts because of those changes.
Yeah, but you also have a weird. If you're dealing with new data all the time, you have a higher miss rate, and you have to go to main memory more. So, yeah, it's like I said, these things have lots of hundreds and hundreds of knobs. And you adjust one, and then the other 3 go out of whack. So, and then eventually you have to get to a point where you say, okay, this is what we want to do, and this is what we think is right for all different sorts of benchmarks. And then you might have a competitor that has tweaked knobs very slightly differently, so they're better at Cinebench or whatever.
You might have a competitor that has said, nope, we just need to throw all this out and do a completely new microarchitecture and chipset. Good lordy, aren't we crazy people? Because who would do a totally new microarchitecture and chipset and everything at the same time? That just seems crazy.
Or you could go on.
It's like, we're going to keep x86 around for legacy compatibility. Could go the Itanium route, where we literally just keep embedding last year's processor inside the rest of the processor, and then there's another processor over here that is the new thing, and so we just have both.
Oh, so that's a weird thing, right? Kind of related. If you look at all the new Intel chipsets that were launched, there's one that's like a workstation mobile chipset. It's like W480M or something. On Intel's Arc on their database, it lists the recommended consumer price as $51. I can get a dual core Comet Lake Celeron for 42.
That chipset. I mean, to be fair, that chipset probably has more computational horsepower than that Celeron. I mean,
Oh yeah. It's also probably because it's a mobile chipset, it's optimized for power, and I bet you the Celeron isn't, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's
wasn't that one of
Celeron.
the things out of the Intel management engine leak was like, wait a minute, you mean to tell me the Southbridge can run x86 code?
Yep.
What?
Yeah. It's yeah, and it's but the thing with the $42 processor is if you look at the cheapest current Coffee Lake refresh processors, $60.
Yeah.
So even though it says 42, it's I said I did my CPU guide recently, and in that CPU guide we typically do what CPU do you need if you want to do a $300 build, and usually for that build for a gaming build I pick about a $50 processor because the rest of the system is going to cost, especially if you're buying new. And the cheapest processors I could find were $60 of the latest generations. Otherwise, you have to go pick up something secondhand. So either you can go AMD Athlon 3000G, which was $75. That's spiked up in price for some reason, or you can get the Pentium something or other, and that was $60 as well. So,
what a time to be alive. Things are getting exciting. There's also new processors coming out from other places. So, yeah. We can switch gears a little bit and take some questions from the chat. Does anybody have any general technology questions? I mean, there's everybody and their brother released the Intel press release. I don't really have anything to contribute other than this what we've talked about in the slide deck here. I mean, it's all just speculation and jawboning. It's not really anything super useful. We need to show me the silicon. Show me silicon.
This is a nice interlude for me to promote my YouTube channel.
Yes.
If for people who didn't join straight away, I now have a YouTube channel. You can join me at youtube.com /TechTechPotato.
The link is in the description.
Yeah, and Tech Potato because we always talk about chips and chips are tasty. That sort of thing. I mean,
eat all the wafers.
And that's the big joke. And the logo is a potato, and it says minimum specifications. I've got my first 3 videos up where I talk about AMD NUCs, and I did a collaboration video just last. Wendell took part of that. I've also got Austin Evans and Linus and a few other people in the industry, and that was really fun. Yeah, so it's going to be it's my part-time thing, right? I'm going to do content that may not necessarily be focused on the sort of Anantech stuff. So fun things like talking about CPUs that were built very specifically for Formula One computational fluid dynamics by AMD. Something which we may see again soon now that AMD has a new relationship with Mercedes. So that would be a fun video to follow up on, and I've got a ton of ideas to do. It's mostly me just talking to camera and showing slides, but for most of my videos, I try and have props that I can show off, and maybe things like this. Ooh.
It's the fastest EPYC in the West.
So this is the 24-core 7F72. This arrived, and you can see it's still got the seal on, and for some reason AMD shipped it in this big AMD EPYC box.
That's a nice cost-effective way to do that, though. You don't have to go too insane.
It just means I now have several of them, and I'm not entirely sure what to do with them.
Luke Torres asked if this 10th gen is 10 nanometers or 14 nanometers. Well, we've been talking about today 14 nanometers. Most of the 10 nanometer stuff is relegated to just mobile, although a lot of mobile CPUs are also 14 nanometers.
Anything you see that's labeled Comet Lake is 14 nanometer class. Anything Ice Lake is 10 nanometer. Don't ask about Rocket Lake, we don't know.
You can't see this, but I'm holding up a hard drive from my shelf. It's a Seagate ST4 10800W. It's a 9 gigabyte, like a 10 gigabyte unformatted, a 9 gigabyte mechanical hard drive, 5 1/4 inch full height. It weighs as much as a cinder block. It was
Oh
state
god.
of the art technology and the land before time. It's an incredible piece of technology. I don't know. I had to move that because underneath it is this. This is a slot 1 Pentium 3 Xeon. This is from when they moved the cache off of the processor. There was like an on again, off again thing. It was a cache on the processor, cache off the processor. This one has cache on the processor and cache off the processor on this giant printed circuit board that just slams into a motherboard. And you would usually run 2 of these, so dual pro. You
Oh,
were really cooking.
oh, those giant cartridges. Yeah.
It's
It's
933. It's before Coppermine.
it's if you can see here, I have Final Fantasy 30th edition Chocobo, but behind it is an S3 Trio V4 Plus graphics card.
Well, that wouldn't have been out of place in that server then.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got some hard drive stuff as well. All the platters that I've taken out of old hard drives, they're all there. And I've also got a bunch of AMD driver installation CDs from old graphics cards.
If anyone is the least bit OCD, they should never take apart a hard drive because they'll see how clean a platter is in a hard drive, and then they'll be obsessed that nothing else in their life is anywhere near as clean.
And how very quickly they get dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What CPU chipset interconnect would you like to have seen on Z490? X8? An X8 link? I mean, come on. An X8 link, it would have probably only been about 20 or 30 more pins, and if that, and that would have given you PCI Express by 8 interface to the chip, which will tide us over. You could reasonably run a PCI Express NVMe, a high performance one. Because let's face it, if you're shelling out $800 for a motherboard and $500 for a processor, you're probably going to get a nice SSD, and it would make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And PCIe 3 is still reasonable with the power. PCIe 4 chipset links still consume a lot of power. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to come down. Maybe as it becomes more, there's more in the market and people just understand more about it. And the mobile chips still use PCIe 3 on the AMD side because of power reasons. It's the thing is, Intel will have to dedicate more die area to PCIe lanes for that extra DMI link, but then also if they want to put more PCIe lanes for direct attach M.2, that sort of thing, and whether they actually want to put the die area. I mean, Intel wants to put AVX 512 in these cores eventually. Yeah. It makes you wonder if they're not going to go chiplet at some point, because then they can shove some of this onto a 14 nanometer chiplet, say, and then they can just keep the cores for 10 nanometer. I don't see, unless Intel can get their physical design right on 10 or on 7. I don't see Intel staying monolithic for too long.
Yeah, that makes sense. It'd be a lot easier to manufacture, if nothing else. I mean, just it makes sense.
The thing is that if you have a chiplet design, if you want integrated graphics, the graphics have to be on the same chiplet as the memory controller, especially for consumer graphics. Otherwise, you get horrible latency. So a theoretical Intel I/O die might have Xe graphics on it in a future product. I could speculate about that for ages. I have no clue what's going to happen. Intel have not shared with me.
From a heat dissipation standpoint as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm genuinely impressed how well 14 nanometer holds up with just ridiculous power and thermals. I mean, if it were the 1940s and the cost of energy just didn't matter anymore, it could be sustainable. I mean, a 1600 watt 28 core machine, that wouldn't necessarily be that terrible.
Oh. I'm waiting for proper PCIe 4 SSDs as well. The current Phison ones. We were meant to get them we were meant to get a load this year, and I suspect a lot of them would have been announced at Computex in June.
Yeah.
That may be delayed because of the situation, because of human malware.
Yeah. There seems to have been a lot of work on firmware as well, because some of the things that I follow in the industry, tracking performance and things like that, a lot of the PCIe Gen 4 SSDs, just anecdotally, this isn't universally true, but pretty much true. It's really tuned for single user workloads, and some single user workloads suffer as a result of that because they look like multi user workloads. But a lot of the algorithms for dealing with triple level cell flash and wear leveling and crap like that, a lot of that was really, really rushed out the door. And the software on modern SSDs with modern flash has to be ludicrously complex in order to maintain performance as the drive fills. And the drive really needs to understand a lot about the file system, the underlying file system, in order to do a lot of background tasks when the system is otherwise idle. I mean, it is crazy how complicated it is, and it's crazy how much computational horsepower an SSD needs to do that in order to not, wear itself out prematurely. And I don't know that even with the delays, I don't know that we're there, because it is a monumental programming undertaking to be able to deal with all this.
You have to become an expert in how Flash actually behaves.
Yeah.
How the silicon behaves.
I'm going to load this flash drive up with a lot of storage. Oh, it's ever slightly lighter now. What sort of crazy physics is this? It's not measurably lighter, but it does technically lose mass.
It's that whole thing of if you could put all the electrons in the internet into a physical space, it'd be the size of a strawberry or something stupid like that.
Yes. Probably not even, yeah, but I mean, you're counting like electricity that things are running on, not just like things that are stored in, but yeah.
What's denser, an electron or a neutron?
Oh. Wait. Yeah. No. Yeah. An electron. So.
Sourbar asks, I have a 9900K. Will it be worth upgrading? No.
No.
If all you do is game, no. If you game at anything more than say 1440p, you probably won't see a difference.
We've got the slide that has like the performance, like how much gain would go over a 9900K. So you got to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt here. 33% more versus the previous gen. It's a 9900K, so we're talking about a 9900K at stock speeds. If you're not running your 99K at least 4.9 gigahertz all core, probably 5 gigahertz is fine. Then you can upgrade right now. You can just go tweak your BIOS and enjoy. You get 2 more cores, but basically for gaming and pretty much everything except content creation, you're already there.
With XE coming on Tiger Lake and XE able to do SIMD, could we see wider vector computation such as AVX2 and AVX512? I'm under the impression that Tiger Lake has AVX512 because it's a Sunny Cove or a post Sunny Cove. Does that answer your question, Sam?
Which version of AVX512?
Oh, don't start that.
I need the Venn diagram. Somebody's got to give me the Venn diagram for me to understand.
The best thing out of AVX512 isn't the software that's accelerated by it. It's that damn diagram. I love it.
Chris asks, what do we want to see from Ryzen 4000 desktop Threadripper 4000 processors in terms of features, performance, etc.? I would, for Zen 3, just take everything that we have right now. Nothing needs to change. If I can get more IPC and the larger cache would benefit those single thread programs. Like if I could, it's like, oh man, your computer's really busy on like 16 threads, and the scheduler and the hardware can figure that out better, and the cache is more evenly loaded across the entire system, I will jump up into the air and click my heels together. That sounds like not a lot. That's actually a lot, but that's all they need to do for Ryzen 4000 to carry us for the next 36 months of computing.
If you change the 4-core CCX to an 8-core CCX, so you have 1 CCX per chiplet, and then obviously some minor microarchitectural tweaks, you're golden.
Yeah, we're good.
I mean, to be honest, everybody's talking about combining CCX, the CCXs, so you have that larger L3, and that makes sense. if you combine the CCXs, you technically might also save a little bit on the Infinity Fabric.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. We might actually be having a new generation of Infinity Fabric, which may be a bit more optimized.
I think
Um,
I don't think anything is confirmed, but you know how some Infinity Fabric operations the writes have half the available lanes as the reads. Those kinds of things may go away in the next generation.
I mean, it's always a balancing act for that sort of stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, and then does turning on XMP still officially void Intel's warranty? I believe so. If you go, it's one of those things where um, it's unofficial support versus official support and validated support. So yeah, running 30 DDR4 3600 on an Intel chip is technically overclocking. That technically avoids your warranty, um, though Intel doesn't technically check for that. Because I mean, the easiest thing to do is the minute you detect an overclock is you burn a fuse,
Yeah.
and then when the RMA comes, if
Check
Intel
the
gets the
fuse.
chip from you, you just check the fuse. Um, so, but I don't think Intel does that.
Uh,
Um,
we had a question that was the Linux hot swap cores on and off was mentioned. Does it close off the tap completely, or is it just run at a super low voltage? Well, so the threads aren't really aware. Most threads aren't really aware of like the cores, and the ones that are. So, like if you run a program, like say you run Indigo, and Indigo detects 64 cores, and then you offline 32 of the cores, the kernel will just run those 64 threads or 128 threads on whatever threads are available, just doing the whole timeshare thing. If the program rechecks, then the program will run correctly. But if the program never checks the CPU, like the number of threads available or any program that depends on it, then it's not going to run correctly until it's restarted until that process runs. But for normal desktop work, you can totally offline the processors in Linux and it's fine. And in terms of like power savings and all that, that's down to the platform. I mean, it's not anything special. The hardware provides like the C1, C2, C3, C6 states for cores, and then the operating system could just be like, I'm not going to schedule anything on this. You might as well go ahead and shut it down, and that's all it is.
um, was it? Then you also have ACPI standards, which means that you can allow cores to not go below a certain power state, just so they're it's fast enough to go up. And
Yeah.
though,
Ideally, the operating system deals with that because a lot of the time changing those power states does take a non-trivial amount of time. And so
yeah,
if the operating system is putting to sleep and waking up cores in a suboptimal configuration, the CPU, the amount of work done per unit time will be dramatically way less than it should be because the operating system is stupid. Windows. And they fix that with drivers sometimes. Sometimes they don't.
the first thing Windows needs to do is stop with the whole 64 threads per processor group. I mean, it's
Yeah.
in the same way that moving from 32-bit to 64-bit was a hassle. We just need to change that byte mask from whatever it is to a double the size. It's just
I don't think you
annoying me
realize
to
how
no
much
end.
stuff is going to be broken inside of Windows if we do that.
Boo-hoo.
A question for you was: would you save latency between, say, Core 0 and 7 and an 8 CCX design versus a 4-core CCX design? This is what we were talking about with the Infinity Fabric, I think.
Um, Probably not, because you're probably actually when a CCX add talks to another CCX, it has to go visit the IO die, right? So
Except for,
Renoir.
uh, yeah, and they wouldn't. I don't think they would have to do that on
No.
the 8-core. Like they could just communicate like directly on the CCD.
Well, yeah, I think each CCX has either a crossbar or a ring. I'm pretty sure it's a crossbar on how it connects. So each core can talk to each other core. And yeah, the minute you go to an 8-core CCX, is you have to essentially make a longer crossbar.
Yeah, the latency graphs is like the hyper-threaded thing is like right there, and then the ones in the same CCX is a small amount, and then the different CCX on the same silicon right now is it has to go out to the I/O die and back. So I
Yep.
think you did a table of those latencies, and we did a table of latencies in a similar way in some of our reviews. It's very interesting.
It's we're having some trouble with that piece of software right now with some Epic CPUs because it has 5 different levels of latency or something. Though using 2 Intel Cascade Lake CPUs is fine. We need to get to the problem of that. But yeah, that should help. Where do I start to learn about hardware to the degree that you guys have knowledge of? For people that don't know, I trained as a chemist. My degrees are actually in computational chemistry. So the way I learned is that I was actually an extreme overclocker for many, many years. And I started writing like detailed guides about which drivers to use for which benchmarks to get the best performance. And it just so happened that through that I met somebody who was in the industry, and I just try and absorb information, read a lot. It's the difference between written and video media is that written tends to be a lot more detailed than video. Also, you can skim read it if it's not that much interesting. I didn't actually do any computer science degrees. I learned a lot through inference and a lot through, again, just through reading. I mean,
you get to learn computer science through practical things, because doesn't your PhD have like some CUDA stuff in it?
Yeah, so the one time I actually did a course was actually learning how to program a GPU. Back when CUDA was
computer science.
Yeah. Okay, so the only reason I managed to get onto that course was because I was in my freshman year of my PhD. I met a guy who was doing computational financial mathematics, and it was his research supervisor that was the first person in the UK hired by NVIDIA to do a learn how to use CUDA on GPUs. And it just so happened to be that he was in my university, and I had met this guy 2 months prior, and I put out on Facebook at the time saying, oh, wouldn't it be cool to learn how to do this? And he responded, oh, my supervisor's doing a course next month for free, because it was the first one. It was just a trial run. You should apply. So I did, and that essentially forms the next 3 years of my PhD.
Nice.
But my coding skills are atrocious. I vaguely know what recursion is. I do.
Don't worry. A lot of computer science PhDs also vaguely know what recursion is. So, I mean, as we go through the checklist, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. I literally, one of my bookmarks is a regex tester. So all my benchmarks that I do are scripted, and it's just basically very basic commands repeated and moving files, and then using PowerShell to take off, the first 2 lines of a results file, then using a regex to make sure I get the exact value out of that line that I want, and then just doing simple math in code. Benefits of being in the press means that I can attend events like ISSCC, Solid State Circuits Conference, events like Hot Chips. I really want to drag Wendell out to a Hot Chips event once.
It does sound like fun. You kind of talked me into it. It's like, but then it's like, oh, that actually does sound pretty cool.
It's a shame that the one this year is going to be online only. So I'm not too sure whether I'm actually going to do a live blog, or whether I'm just going to write up some of the articles. Again, reading stuff like that. It's funny. So after a while, you said, you tend to write at a certain level because you feel that the audience is moving along with the same level of complexity as, you're trying to stay one step ahead of the audience, right? And there are millions of people who know a lot more than you. You're just, in my case, I'm just the lackey that happens to write stuff. And I, ask Lisa Sue awkward questions.
That's because you put effort into trying. It's like, it's like, I'm just a lowly computer janitor, but I try, gosh darn it. A lot of
Yeah,
people don't try.
it's. I mean, I one of the recent conferences I did, IEDM, I sat through 2 days of tutorials, and it's just lots of slides about the how to manufacture semiconductors and TSMC's 5 nanometer, and talking about how changes in 3 nanometer. Um, oh, but as I was saying, being one step ahead, I remember one time I think it was the KB Lake CPUs. They launched the review embargo was just after CES in January, and I remember that I was on my way home on the plane writing the reviews. I had done the i9, the i7, the i3, and I decided that this time the reviews were going to be separate chips rather than all in one. Do separate chips. So I did the i9 one, and that was fine. That got a lot of traffic. I did the i7, that did pretty poor for traffic. But by the time I got to the i3 on the plane, I was so tired. I basically wrote that article like I was trying to talk to a 5-year-old almost. I was explaining every little thing in what I considered at the time very aggressive writing, as in, this is what this is, you should know this, but obviously a lot kinder than that. That got a lot of traffic, and a load of people said it was the best review I'd ever written. Thanks, guys.
Nice.
But I mean, there is recourse for people to every so often write from a first principles. Was it Carl Sagan who had that famous quote that said that if you can't present a complex topic in a 1-hour lecture to a college freshman, then you don't understand it.
Yeah, that's come up a lot. Also, Feynman would say something like that. It's
Feynman, yeah, sorry, not
yeah.
Sagan, Feynman.
But yeah, and that's very true. I found I've done I do a lab every now and then for college students, and I find that like when I review the material, it's like, oh, I've learned something that I didn't know before just reviewing this, aimed at undergraduates, and it's like, oh, that's neat.
Yeah, watch Carl Sagan's Cosmos, either the old one or the new one. Feynman's lectures. I've actually got a few Feynman comic books that are really interesting, talking about his life. There's a series of lectures on YouTube that's free from Ona Mutlu, I think his name is. He takes college freshman 101, what is computer architecture. Those are really fun courses to do. I should probably watch more than I should have. They're like 2-3 hours at a time. And for some of the stuff, he takes a very abstract view into, you're talking about computer architecture. So here's an hour talking about real architecture, buildings and stuff. And why did the architect do this? And, the pros and cons of thinking in different ways. This is before you even start learning about what a cache is. Right. So
why did the architect do a thing that was vulnerable to Spectre and Meltdown? Well, it was an earlier, more innocent time.
So, it's I haven't taken as many classes that I probably should have. I'm the sort of person that learns a lot of things through inference, as in I will understand that one person said this, but another person said this. Well, why did they say different things? And it's why a lot of the press people or the press relations people that I deal with at companies like Intel and AMD and other places, they really hate me when I ask questions.
Well, no, that's a great way to learn. I mean, the mathematician Nash, brilliant guy, but he was remembered because he would latch onto a problem, and it was like, I think I can solve this problem, but it would overlap several different domains, and so he would go and ask colleagues, like, you work in this field, what is this? And like the questions were kind of dumb at first, and then they were less dumb, and then they were less dumb, and he just sort of circled like a buzzard in on the problem until he had a good grasp. But also the different people's perspectives really seem to make a difference in pushing the state of the art forward. So I mean, that's a good process. But there are a lot of people that are like, wow, that's a really dumb question, you shouldn't ask questions. I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm an idiot, I want to understand this.
The amount of times I've said, explain it like I'm 5, please. and then I have to say, no, simpler. No, simpler. But the thing is, because I can, I've got to a point in my journalist career that I'm sometimes a bit of an idiot, or I'm a bit of a dick at times. I will ask questions just for the sake of to hear what they say, to make sure as in I know the answer to the question. Do they know the answer to the question? That annoys people, especially if they realize what I'm doing. It's a very fun way to ask questions about topics that people don't want to talk about. But I've actually stopped myself going on tours of certain things because I know that I just won't be able to shut up because I will ask questions that nobody's interested in. And I could just imagine my wife beside me just with her head in her hands saying he's not with me.
Everything
It,
is interesting if you go deep enough. I mean, that's just the way that it is.
yeah,
Everything.
and it just so happens that we've latched onto the semiconductor space, right?
Well, I mean, the semiconductor space, like when you go down to like the material science part of it, is kind of closely guarded, and TSMC's been a little more open than Intel in some regards. But it is a kind of black magic where the magic of 14 nanometer was what replacing carbon with or silicon, no, copper with cobalt,
Yeah.
uh, and it's like okay, how many things did they have to try? Did they just look at the periodic table and go down one row, or what?
Well, I mean, the other element there is also ruthenium, and then you find out that um, the applied materials versus cadence, these companies that actually deal with these exotic designs for these manufacturing nodes, one company will go along one route, then one company will go along another route, and then you'll find that Intel has sided with applied materials, and TSMC has gone with cadence, and they're trying to get to the same destination, but through two totally different routes, and then you realize one has hit a tree.
One has hit a tree, was not wearing their seatbelt, and are currently still airborne.
But they were miles ahead when they hit the tree. Now they're playing catch up.
Yeah, they're losing a little inertia now. I mean, they're just I don't know. The future.
I was going to say it's that fun thing where in the Road Rash game where you can go from 200 miles an hour to zero by hitting a tree.
It's the future is unknown but exciting. It's sort of a lot of fun. That was today's big news from Intel, and I think that'll probably just about wrap up the stream unless we've got any more questions.
So somebody said, "How do I can't see the question." Said, "How do I find where?" Yeah, I can't see it anymore. It was like, "How do I find these things to help me learn about things?"
There's a giant building full of dead trees that has stuff that.
Unfortunately, because of the global situation, you probably can't go there right now. It's seriously just if you're on Twitter, just follow interesting people, and every so often fire them a question. Most of them are nice. If you want to learn something, just search for on YouTube freshman lecture. For people who don't know what a freshman is, because that's not a term we use in the UK, first year undergraduate. If you tell people what a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior is in the UK, they look at you funny because those words don't exist in the way the Americans use them. It's funny. I lived in the US for a little while when I was much younger, so I understand some of these things. I understand American football sometimes as well.
I'm not. I'm lost on sports. I have no musical ability and no interest in sports.
Oh, I love sports. I can't play them.
I can't. My brain doesn't. I don't know. It's some sort of cerebral damage. I don't know. It's just I can't follow a beat or a tune or anything that requires precise timing. So like video games where you have the quick time event and you have to respond in kind of a rhythm. Nope, that is the single most frustrating thing that I can. It is basically impossible for me.
It's over the last couple of weeks I've been playing a little bit of video game cricket.
Oh my god! I had no idea that the quarantine was getting to you that bad. I'm sorry. We should have done this sooner.
Yeah, no, but I get annoyed that I can't hit a six every ball. Now, do you understand what I mean by hit a six every ball?
No clue.
Perfect.
Look at the sports ball go. Wow, that was some display last night.
Do you have a physical card you can use in Hardware Club to shut the lesser nerds up? What, like a do you know who I am card? No. I have got to a point now where I've written for 10 years, and if somebody doesn't like what I write, there are enough online people who defend me for some reason. It's a weird feeling. And then also I get identified at tech events. I do remember one guy said, "Wait, are you Ian from Anantech?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Whoa." And that guy just happens to be in chat right now, and he knows I'm talking about him.
I thought you were talking about me for a second, and it was like, oh yeah, I don't know.
No, do you remember? Do you remember the time we met for the first time? It was at the top of the mountain in Taiwan in Computex. Was that the first time we met?
I think that was, yeah. We went to the tea house.
Yeah.
Yeah. That tea house is amazing. I miss it.
I couldn't go last year because the day I was meant to go up the mountain, one, it was raining, and two, I checked and the lift had been out of action for a month.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was almost worth the 45-minute cab ride though, because that Szechuan chicken or whatever it is, like the hot chicken, so good with the peanuts and the peppers, and oh my gosh, so good.
It got an ETA on when Tech Potato gets his mitts on fresh wafers. You know, it's for as well as I did for wafers last year, this year's going to be very minimal, I think. Just unless I decide to buy some from AliExpress, you can get them for $60.
It's just a random assortment, yeah. I got some to put in frames around my office, and I think I ended up with some really interesting stuff, but most of it's just crap.
It's if people are interested in interesting wafers, I did an article a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. It's up on Anantech, where I visited Gordon Moore's desk at Intel.
Oh yeah, I saw the pictures from that. That was really cool.
So he has a wall of wafers that include, like, you know, the first 100% yield wafer. I don't think it was actually the wafer on the thing, but just say let's promote this as a big time in what we did, and then there's like a wall of just Moore's pictures of him shaking hands with various dignitaries. It's the Moore's wall of Moore. And he's like emeritus guy, so he comes in a couple of days a month to check emails. He used an old dual core Celeron Core 2 Duo or something system, and it was I think he was using a 15-inch 10x7 12x7 monitor. I slipped my business card under his mouse mat.
Just cause
I have a picture.
Molly Hazel asks 10900K versus 10900X. What's the difference? Oh Lord, so lost. I'm so sorry. The 10900X is 290 socket 290. They couldn't be more different. They're both 14 nanometer, but probably different times. 10900K X299 quad channel memory, 44 PCIe Express lanes. Completely different platform than 10900K.
AVX 512.
Yeah, it might have been a loaded question there.
Ian, would you ever go to LTX? Yes, Linus hasn't invited me, but that's perhaps because I'm not a YouTuber, a proper one yet.
He just forgot. You're invited. It's fine.
we have spoken about this in the past, whether Wendell and I should both get there and maybe do some sort of tech panel.
If you want to go,
panel.
if you want to go to Vancouver, that is not a problem. We can get you to Vancouver. That's not an issue. There's a lot of cool stuff to do in Vancouver. It's fine.
I've been the other side of Canada. I've not done that side yet. So, oh,
I think that's going to wrap the stream for us. An hour 45 minutes. That's a new record. Thank you everybody for hanging out. We'll catch you in the next one. Probably in a few weeks whenever the next thing launches, right? I mean, that's a thing. I don't know. We
oh,
can't talk about that. Oh. Beep.
tech potato.
Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to all the things Tech Potato. It's right there. It's right at the bottom. Don't forget. And also, you have a Twitter or something.
Yeah, Twitter's good.
Bye. All right, I'm going to hit stop when I see you waving on the live stream.
I wave after you say bye.
Good Lord, it's still going.